Convincing the premiers is one thing, of course, but the Prime Minister also needs to convince the Senate to pass his health blueprint. The opposition has all but ruled out supporting the plan, which brings in the independents and the minor parties. The Greens have signalled they want to negotiate with the government, and they've spelled out their demands on health over the weekend. Greens leader Bob Brown joins us in our Parliament House studio. Bob Brown, welcome to breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
Senator Brown, can the Greens do a deal on hospitals?
Oh, of course we can, and we'll be working to get a good outcome from the government's proposals. That includes reassuring rural and regional Australia about their hospitals. It also, we want to see Denticare brought in, a parallel to Medicare that sees that every Australian's got access to good dental health care, because we all know that that means better health in general. It's a very good investment. So we want to be talking to the government about that to see that that's on the agenda and that's part of the package.
Well, it's not part of the package at the moment, Denticare. It's very expensive. I think the Prime Minister's own Health and Hospitals Reform Commission priced a universal dental healthcare scheme, which is, I think, what you're talking about, at $3.6 billion a year. That's a big change to a plan that's on the table.
That is a big change, but here's the historic opportunity for us to get a universal dental health care system. Fran, the other side of that coin, the other statistic we need there to know there, 500,000 Australians are waiting up to a year to get dental health care. Now that's outrageous, and we need to do better than that. And
well, the government's trying to do better
than
that at the moment, isn't it? It's trying to get rid of one scheme and put in place another scheme. It can't get it through the Senate.
Well, that's not because of the Greens, and we intend to be moving on dental health care and making that part of the negotiating package. But as with the stimulus package, where the opposition says no, the Greens are saying yes, but let's make it better, and we're going to negotiate to get a good outcome. It will be dependent on what the negotiations with the states bring to the Premier's plan. We'll have to see the final plan after it is negotiated with the states, but we're in a positive mood about this because we think Australians want to see healthcare improved, and as I said, that needs to embrace better dental healthcare.
And a guarantee that no small regional hospitals will disappear.
Well, I guarantee that, yes, that rural and regional Australia will see its hospital system vouchsafed. We don't want to see those mass closures that the Premier of New South Wales was just flagging would be a big worry all over the country, not just in New South Wales.
We'll talk about being in a mood for talking. A lot's been made in the last week by the government about of Senate obstructionism. You said last week that the Prime Minister himself doesn't roll up his sleeves enough and get involved with negotiations with parties like yours. Have you and will you be seeking talks with the Prime Minister on health?
Indeed, I wrote to him on the weekend. I wrote to Mr Rudd on the weekend saying, let's talk about this health package that you've got and the Greens innovations that I've just been talking about. Fran, we're ready to talk. We really are serious about getting the healthcare package right, and early talks are the best way of going about that. So it really is over to the Prime Minister.
Have you had any response to that letter yet?
Well, no, in fairness, that's just gone over the weekend, so I wouldn't expect a response yet, but I will expect one in coming days.
The Prime Minister early on signalled that his ministers, portfolio ministers, would be handling issues with the Senate. Why isn't that good enough?
Oh, that is fine. And we have 5 hard-working Green senators who do work well with the portfolio ministers. But we get to a point where it's not moving along, as we see at the moment with the emissions legislation, the climate change legislation. The Greens have put a very positive proposal forward there to have a levy on the biggest polluters. It will bring down greenhouse gas emissions in Australia, and it leaves the stage for future options on a carbon trading scheme or a carbon tax. But where it's static, and that's because we're not getting forward movement with the government on that. And that's where I think the Prime Minister needs to move in. It's no good saying, oh, well, it's not, nothing's happening. On this occasion, it's actually the obstructions coming from the government in terms of there not being action. And I want to see the Prime Minister. I've written to him a number of times about that, but he simply says, well, speak to my minister. And I get the feeling that the Prime Minister has a lot of say over what his ministers are or are not doing. And I think it's appropriate.
So are you really saying that the ministers, the portfolio ministers, it's all very well to talk to them, but they don't have the authority to sign off on the deal?
Exactly. And at the end of the day, that is such important legislation that it requires a Prime Minister getting in there and getting it moving. And if not, to hear from the crossbench or the entities in the Senate as to why it's not moving. That would take 10 minutes of the Prime Minister's time, but a very valuable investment in having this nation get climate change legislation.
Okay, the Senate, we were talking last week about the Tony Abbott's plan for paid parental leave. You liked it, you said go Tony, and it will be introduced to the Senate probably in May. Have the Greens been talking with the opposition about amendments to that scheme?
Sarah Hanson-Young is talking with all players on that, but the real entity here is the government. When I said go Tony, I was very pleased with it because it was the Liberals catching up with the Greens on having a 26-week scheme which Senator Hanson-Young for the Greens introduced into the Parliament a year ago, right ahead of the other parties on this. 26 weeks is still way behind Britain and Canada and Sweden. It should be available for all Australian families, and with it should come a reassurance about superannuation payments, and that's not in the government scheme. At the moment, the government scheme is very much behind equivalent countries overseas, except for the United States, which is the worst performer in the OECD when it comes to parental leave.
But the Abbott scheme is very generous. It goes beyond what the Greens were proposing. I noticed you've also called for a national inquiry into Australia's population. I wonder if discussion of a policy like this should be a part of that. We shouldn't move too far too fast before we have some kind of national inquiry into population, because as Tony Abbott said when he announced his policy plan, that it's about encouraging and supporting Australian women to have more children.
Well, ours isn't, and parental leave doesn't do that. In fact, it encourages women to stay in the workforce. It's quite the contrary. And
have babies. Stay in the workforce and have babies.
No. If people decide to have babies, and all people think about that and aspire to it, I'm sure, then they should be supported through those early months to be with their babies, because we know that leads to great outcomes. And for example, in Sweden, there's 1 year's parental leave with many weeks for the father to be at home as well. Mm-hmm. And the Swedish economy is doing very well, thank you, and the big end of town in Sweden is doing very well, thank you. We can do that, and we should do it, because it's a great way of behaving socially. We know it means better outcome for the children that are involved as well as the parents. But that said, if we can move to half of what Sweden's got, we'd be a long way down the line, and the government's 18 weeks is short of the mark. We need 26 weeks, and we need superannuation to be paid to the workers when they're on that parental leave, so that they know that it's not going to disrupt their plans for the future.
All right, Bob Brown, just a minute before the news, but I should ask you about the forthcoming Tasmanian elections. In Tasmania, the Greens look as though they could be the balance of power players at the end of it. 4 premiers, Labor and Liberal, came out over the weekend appealing to the voters not to let that happen. What's your response?
Oh, yeah, the old men of politics, they didn't look like the three tenors. In fact, they were very out of tune with the Tasmanian public, which is going for the Greens and Nick McKim's Green team down there. Look, Fran, the Labor and Liberal parties look like they'll be in the balance of power after this election. You have to see the Greens as a potential sharing in that power afterwards. Nick McKim has said he'll work with the other parties. They don't seem to be in such a positive mood about it, but that's that is something the voters will consider on the way to the ballot box. The Greens really are upbeat here and in a positive mood, and will contribute very positively after the election to getting good governance for Tasmania.
Senator Brown, the news is upon us. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Fran.